Right after the finale aired, a lot of people brushed off the disappointment by saying it wasn't supposed to be perfect. And honestly, that would have been fine if the problem stopped at pacing or tone. A finale doesn't need to be flawless to be satisfying. It just needs to respect the rules it spent years teaching its audience. That's where things start to fall apart, because the issue here isn't that the ending was quiet or small or even underwhelming in an emotional sense. The issue is that it contradicts itself, shrugs at its own lore, and then expects you not to notice. For most of its run, the story trained viewers to believe one thing above all else: the other world is hostile, alive, and always watching. You step into it, and you're not alone. Touch the wrong thing, and you get swarmed. Disturb the environment, and it responds instantly. That idea was drilled in over and over again. The creatures weren't just monsters, they were part of a system, a hive that reacted as one. That's why the final confrontation feels so bizarre, because suddenly that system just isn't there. When the characters finally enter the heart of the other world, the place where everything originates, it should feel like the most dangerous location imaginable. This is the source. This is home turf. And yet, it's empty. No demogorgons, no dogs, no swarms, nothing lurking in the background. Just the main villain and the larger entity behind him standing around like they booked the place for a private event. It's not tense, it's confusing. The absence is louder than any monster could have been. You don't need to overthink it to see why this doesn't work. These creatures have been used as tools and weapons for years. They've guarded entrances, hunted targets, enforced the will of the hive mind. The idea that they'd all conveniently vanish at the exact moment they'd be most useful doesn't feel like strategy or arrogance. It feels like convenience. The world bends so the fight can be simpler, not more intense. What makes it worse is that the explanation doesn't actually explain anything. The idea that the villain didn't expect an attack on his own territory doesn't hold up when you remember what abilities he has. This is a character who invades minds, digs through memories, and sees plans as they form. He doesn't guess intentions, he observes them directly. Multiple characters involved in the final plan had their minds entered shortly before the ambush. These weren't old memories buried deep. This was the most important plan they had, front and center. The notion that it somehow slipped past him asks the audience to forget how his powers work. And even if you try to hand wave that away, even if you pretend for a moment that he was genuinely surprised, that still doesn't explain the total absence of backup. The hive mind doesn't need a written invitation. We've seen how quickly it reacts. Agitation alone is enough to bring everything running. The center of the hive should be the most heavily populated area by default. The fact that nothing shows up at any point during the fight makes the world feel smaller and less alive than it's ever been. That alone would be frustrating, but it's not even the biggest issue. The most damaging problem comes from something far more fundamental: the rules of the hive mind connection. This wasn't a minor detail introduced late in the story. It was one of the core pillars of the entire series. One character's link to the hive mind was treated as both a curse and a ticking time bomb. Pain inflicted on the hive was pain inflicted on him. Damage echoed through that connection. Entire storylines revolved around trying to sever it because everyone understood what it meant if they didn't. The show itself went out of its way to demonstrate this. Burn the tunnels and he screams. Injure the entity and he feels it. Even near the end, when memories resurface and wounds are inflicted, that pain transfers instantly. The connection is consistent, explicit, and repeatedly reinforced, which is why the finale's handling of it feels so baffling. During the final battle, the hive entity is attacked relentlessly. It's burned, stabbed, torn apart, and yet the character who should be experiencing all of that pain shows nothing. No reaction, no consequence. The connection that once defined entire seasons suddenly behaves like it's optional. And when this inconsistency is pointed out, the explanation boils down to focus. The idea that the pain wasn't shown because attention was elsewhere doesn't solve the problem. It confirms it. Not showing something doesn't mean it didn't happen. If the connection still exists, then the outcome should still apply. And if the outcome applies, then the survival of that character becomes impossible to justify. The story backed itself into a corner and then quietly stepped around it, hoping no one would look down. That's what makes it feel less like a mistake and more like avoidance. The rules were inconvenient, so they were ignored. There's no moment where the connection is severed in a clear, definitive way before the villain's defeat. It just stops mattering because the story needs it to. That kind of writing doesn't just weaken one scene, it retroactively cheapens everything that came before it. Then there's the resolution with the authorities, which feels almost surreal in how casually it's handled. Over the course of the story, the main group is responsible for massive destruction, countless violations, and the deaths of numerous military personnel. They are framed as fugitives, hunted relentlessly, treated as some of the most dangerous individuals imaginable. And then, suddenly, none of that matters. There's a massive time jump, and everything is fine. No trials, no consequences, no deals or explanations. Operations are quietly dismantled, everyone packs up, and life goes on. It's not that a clean ending is impossible. It's that skipping the explanation entirely makes the world feel artificial. Actions stop having weight. Threats stop being real. What's especially strange is how unsure the narrative seems about its own decisions. Questions about why certain elements exist or why specific numbers were chosen are met with vague answers or aesthetic reasoning. Symbols are used because they look cool, not because they mean something. That's deflating, especially for a story that encouraged viewers to analyze, theorize, and connect dots for years. When a show invites that level of engagement, it takes on a responsibility. You don't have to confirm every theory, but you should understand your own logic. Hearing that major elements don't actually signify anything makes earlier depth feel accidental rather than intentional. It turns careful foreshadowing into coincidence. All of this contributes to a finale that doesn't feel earned. The confrontation is brief. The resolution is rushed. The fallout is glossed over. What should have been the culmination of a decade-long story plays out in minutes, then fades into a neat epilogue that avoids answering the hardest questions. And looming over all of it is the sense that the ending wasn't meant to be an ending at all. Loose threads aren't just left unresolved, they're left open. Not in a mysterious way, but in a commercial one. It feels like the door was deliberately kept ajar, not for imagination, but for expansion. Spin-offs, extensions, more content. The finality is compromised by the knowledge that this world isn't actually done. That's where the disappointment really settles in. Not anger, not outrage, just a quiet letdown. There was so much potential for a conclusion that honored the rules, respected the stakes, and delivered something lasting. Instead, the finale feels hesitant, unsure, and unwilling to commit to the consequences it spent years setting up. It's not a disaster. It's not a total failure. It's worse in a way. It's forgettable in places where it should have been unforgettable. And when you start pulling at the threads, you realize how much was held together by the assumption that no one would look too closely. For a story that once thrived on detail, that's a tough note to end on.